So what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the poker vlog Run Good Play Better. If this is your first time watching, my name's Austin, and if you're a returning viewer, I really appreciate your support. So this episode is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be kind of like numbered like my other episodes. It's actually going to be the start of a tournament kind of aspect of my poker vlog that I'm going to be doing. I joined a group called the Agents of Poker that gets together monthly and plays a tournament. Uh, Basically, based on the placement in that monthly tournament, you can accumulate points, and at the end of the season, all those points are gathered together, and the people with the most points can enter another tournament basically to secure spots to go to the WSOP, basically funded by the group. So it's a real cool opportunity. I'm pretty excited for it. I'm really happy about it. I played the first tournament last month. Actually, on this day today, I'm going to be going to the second tournament. And this video is basically just going to be a vlog from that last tournament that I played in. So won't give away any spoilers as to how I did in the tournament as far as placement goes. But it was a pretty fun time playing. There's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of crazy hands. I think I made some pretty good decisions on some of the hands. So pretty excited to get into that with you guys. So like I kind of mentioned, the tournament that I played and we're going to be doing the vlog for today was a month ago. It's really just been taking me a long time to get these videos worked out and processed. And the reason for that is because I went back to work in the past couple of weeks. During the past year, I had a couple of months, twice, where I had time off from work due to just kind of medical reasons. Needed some minor surgeries, but in the past month, I've gone back to work in a state where I think I'm going to be healthy going forward and not need to take any more time off. So I'm actually wearing my company hat here. It's a pretty cool hat, I think, because I just got it yesterday. We just had a company meeting where we kind of went over the details of an acquisition that another company made for us. So my company just got bought out. It's a really cool opportunity because they're not looking to cut out any of the original employees. They want to keep us the way we are, but they want us to help them grow and help us grow at the same time. So it's a pretty cool opportunity. I've been really busy just trying to get back in the swing of working and making time for the vlog afterwards. I really haven't had that much time to play cash game poker, but it's you got to go to work and create a living for yourself until this really takes off. So I'm just doing what's important for me in my life right now. Usually I like to do the personal aspect of the vlog, but to keep it kind of short, I'm just gonna let that be the personal aspect of today's vlog. Let you guys get a little bit of insight into my life. And yeah, I hope you guys are liking the content this far, and I hope you guys are ready to see some of the action from the tournament. Let's get into it.
Alright guys, so in the first interesting hand of this tournament, I am in the small blind and the blinds are 200, 300, 300 with the big blind ante. The player in the cutoff makes a raise to 1100 and I look down at pocket kings, which I think is going to feel pretty good 3-betting here, so I make a raise to 2500 and the player in the cutoff makes the call, so we're going to go to a flop heads up, which comes 254 rainbow. I put in a continuation bet here of 2K. I think it's a pretty good board for me to bet on. If my opponent has an ace, I want to charge him for the gut shot. And it's pretty likely that I could have an ace myself with an overcard or two. So making the bet here is really going to be pretty standard, I think. So I make a bet of 2K. The player in the cutoff makes the call, and we go to a turn. The turn brings the 3 of spades, and I really don't love it. I check it over to my opponent because it's likely he could have an ace himself, and he puts out a bet of 3600 here. It gets me a little bit worried that he could have made a straight, but I really don't intend to fold here. We both started the hand with about 60k, so 3600 is really not that large of a bet given our stack sizes, and I just make the call here. We go to a river, which comes the king of diamonds. It gives me top set, but it's a pretty scary board with 4 to the straight, so I just check it over to him. He slows his roll and checks it back himself. And I just flip over the kings here for top set. My opponent says that my hand is good, and I'm going to make a little over 9K of profit and tournament chips in this hand. Feels pretty good as this is actually the very first hand that I played during the tournament. And it's a pretty nice start to the tournament, and I feel good about that. I think that the call on the turn was a little bit, could be viewed as a little bit loose, but given that it was really only a single bet and I had checked it over to my opponent, it really just makes sense for him to fire off on the turn here. If he made another very large bet on the river, I probably just have to fold, even though I hit top set. But he doesn't end up doing this, and we take down a pretty healthy size pot. The next interesting hand of this tournament comes within the same level. The blinds are still at 200, 300, 300, and I look down at ace jack offsuit in the hijack position. I make a raise to 1200 and pretty quickly get re-raised to 2500 from the player in the cutoff. He seemed like a pretty solid player with about 78k in his stack. I have about 67 in my stack, and the player in the small blind actually comes ahead and makes the call herself. She has about 50k in her stack, and I briefly think about 4-betting to try and isolate either the player in the small blind or the player in the cutoff. But really, I just don't love a 4-bet with ace jack offsuit, especially against the player in the cutoff who I really have no experience with, or the player in the small blind. So I just make the call, and we go to a flop which comes jack high with the deuce and a 4 of spades. The small blind player checks it over to me, and I want to let the pre-flop raiser continue his aggression, so I go ahead and check it over to him as well, and the player in the cutoff just decides to check back himself. So we go to a turn which comes the 8 of hearts, and now the small blind player decides to lead out on this board for a bet of 5,500. It's a pretty good sized bet into the pot that we have so far, about 2/3 of pot, and it kind of gets me wondering what she's going to have at this point. I think it's likely she could have a hand like ace 8 or ace jack of spades, and really it's not the best spot to be in against a player with a pair and a flush draw. It really just doesn't make sense that she would check the flop and then now bet this turn. I don't really see an 8 helping her unless she somehow has pocket 8s in this spot. But either way, I just make the call. The player in the cutoff position, who was the pre-flop raiser, folds, and we go to a river, which comes the 8 of spades now. And the player in the small blind really takes quite a while before verbally announcing that she's going to check. The way she says it just sounds a little bit funny to me, which I'll let you guys listen to now.
I will check.
And really, just given how long that she took to make her decision and the speed of which she decided to say that she was going to check, makes me really feel like I'm just getting trapped at this point. She could have a hand like ace 8, she could have a flush at this point, and really even could even have pocket deuces or pocket 4s for a boat. So I just go ahead and show my ace jack, and my opponent actually shows ace 10 of spades here. The whole table kind of gets a little bit wild and starts questioning her as to why she didn't bet the river. And she tells the table that she actually had plans to check raise because she really thought that I was going to put out a bet here. So I actually dodge a huge bullet by saving a bet on this river. And I think even on the turn, given that she had the nut flush draw, if I had re-raised her bet, she definitely wasn't going anywhere. So I'm pretty happy that I decided to just check back on the river and did not raise on the turn. So I lose a little bit of my stack, most of the profits that I just made with the pocket kings hands, but it's still early in the tournament and I'm really not too worried about it. I'm just happy that I made a good decision. So a little bit of time goes by where I chip up and then try to make a pretty good sized bluff into aces and chip down a little bit, and eventually just end up at 300, 600, 600 blinds. The player in the hijack, the cutoff, and the small blind all limp in before it gets back to me in the big blind with queen 8 offsuit, and I just check back my option. We go to a flop which comes pretty sweet for my specific hands. It comes 9 jack 10 rainbow, And I've now flopped the second nuts in a multi-way pot with a decent amount in the pot already. I'm really not too worried about the board, and given how many people are in this pot, I think someone's going to throw out a bet. So when the small blind checks it over to me, I check it back pretty quickly as well. And the hijack player puts out a bet of 1500. The player in the cutoff folds, the player in the small blind makes the call, and I really don't want to scare anyone off yet. I'm happy to get a little bit more money in the pot and try to let my opponents attempt to catch up at this point, so I just make the call. And we go to a turn which brings the five of diamonds. I really don't think it's going to help anybody's hand specifically, but the player in the small blind actually decides to lead out for 3000 at this point. And given how he checked the flop and called a bet and is now leading on the turn, I think he's going to have a pretty strong hand of some sorts. So I decided to put in a raise now to 9,000. I think that it's likely he's going to call and the player in the hijack is going to fold. The player in the hijack does end up folding, and the player in the small blind calls pretty quickly, which is music to my ears. And the river brings the ace of clubs, which really doesn't change anything for my hand. It's still a rainbow board, and I still have the second nuts. If my opponent has king queen here, so be it. But he ends up leading the river for 15,000, which makes me start to think that he might have a hand like ace jack. Maybe he has jack 10, maybe even jack 9. He could have a hand like nines, tens, or jacks, but I really would have expected him to raise pretty much like all of these hands pre-flop, except for jack 10 or jack 9. But really, there's nothing to do here except for just move all in for my opponent's remaining chips. He has about 26 or 7,000 left, and he really doesn't seem too happy about this move all in, but he does end up making the call here. I show over queen 8 offsuit for the flop straight, and he mucks his cards pretty quickly. Later on, I talk to him, and he tells me that he did actually have ace jack in this situation. So it was really just his mistake for not raising pre-flop. If he had, I would have gotten out of there pretty quickly. But since he made the mistake of not raising, he let me see a flop and ended up getting stacked. So this is a really sweet hand for me because it's just going to give me the opportunity to coast along for the next couple of levels and wait till I can make some more big hands. After this hand, I really just end up folding most of my hands. I don't really see any hands that are worth playing or giving away chips, and I have about 140k going into the dinner break, coming back to 1k blinds, so I feel pretty good about that. The dinner break was a pretty cool part of the tournament. The host of the event actually catered barbecue, and it was really cool to kind of get to meet some of the people. I knew one guy going into this event who was one of the hosts, and really just everybody there seemed to be very friendly with each other. They all seemed to know each other for a pretty long time and really just all enjoyed the game of poker and playing. So I got a little clip of some of the hosts of the event wearing their Agents of Poker t-shirts. But since I didn't get any clips of the actual food itself, we'll just jump back into the vlog. So I pretty much just end up folding everything after the dinner break. A level goes by before we're now at blinds of 1k 1500. I have about 120k left in my stack at this point. I really chipped down a little bit, but nothing too drastic. And I end up recording the hand right before this one, end up missing the flop completely and folding, but it's kind of cool because you get to see me get dealt my cards here. The players in the middle position and the low jack and the cutoff all decide to limp in here. And when I look down at ace 10 suited on the button, there's really nothing to do but make a large raise and hope everyone folds. At worst, I can at least play a large suited ace on the button. So I decided to put out a bet of 12,500. The player in the small blind and the big blind both fold, but the player in middle position, the player in the low jack, and the player in the cutoff all actually decide to end up making the call here. So pretty much the worst case scenario ends up happening. We are now going to go four ways to a flop with about 50k in the middle. a little bit over that actually because of the blinds. And I'm really not too thrilled about that fact. But when the flop comes ace king 4, I feel a little bit of hope. The player in the middle position checks it over to me. The player in the low jack goes ahead and checks it over to me as well. And the player in the cutoff also goes ahead and checks. And I kind of have to sit here and wonder what my opponents are going to have at this point. It's very likely that at least one of them is going to have a flush draw or some kind of a Broadway draw. And I really am not about to let this check through. I kind of decide to take a look at everybody's stacks and see about how much everybody has before putting out a bet of 35,000. It's about 2/3 the size of the pot and really just about puts almost everyone at a point where they are either going to go all in or fold. The player in the middle position really doesn't look too happy about this. He takes his time before folding. The player in the low jack actually asked to count out his stack just before I made the bet, and he just pretty quickly moves all in. The player in the cutoff position folds after he sees the player in the low jack move all in. I go ahead and make the call here. The player in the low jack position started the hand with about 46,000, so I put in the extra couple thousand to make the call, and we're now going to go to a run out. So we're going to a pretty big pot at this point. He shows over king 8 of hearts. The board runs out with a jack of spades on the turn and an 8 of diamonds on the river. It's pretty brutal because I think that I won after the flush draw misses, but then I end up realizing that he actually made 2 pair on the river and the pot is now going his way. It's really not a great feeling because I had a little over double the starting stack, and at this point, I'm pretty close to a starting stack again after having a pretty good chip lead over the table. But really, just hands like this are what make poker poker. And it's actually kind of funny because putting this hand into a calculator after the fact, my opponent was ahead by 0.1% on the flop. So really, I think we both made a good move here. I think checking back the flop and jamming turn would have produced a pretty similar result of my opponent just jamming, but it would have actually reduced his equity by quite a bit as he has less streets to make his hand on. But I mean, regardless, I think just getting it all in on the flop here is okay. So I'm just going to lose a pretty good sized pot and hope I can turn things around in future hands. Moving on here, there's a raise from the under the gun player to 16,000. Blinds are at 3K, 6K. The under the gun has about 80K in his stack, and the under the gun +1 player calls. The player in the low jack calls, and I decide to call from the big blind after looking down at king 10 of clubs. The flop comes out as a dream. It comes king 10 for rainbow. I check it over to the under the gun player, and he takes no time at all before shipping in his stack. He has about 60 something thousand remaining. Everyone else just ends up folding, and I have nothing to do here but just make the call. It's a pretty sweet spot for me. I end up making the call, and my opponent ends up showing king queen offsuit. We go to a run out, which comes the 3 of diamonds on the turn and the 6 of diamonds on the river, and I'm going to scoop a pretty massive pot. I started the hand with about 120k after chipping up a little bit more, and now I have pretty close to 200,000, and I'm feeling really good about my stack size again. I'm now the second chip leader at the table, and I'm really just hoping I can continue this momentum and get away from coolers like that ace 10 suited hand. But this definitely won't be the case as I see the next under the gun player decide to shove all in pre-flop, opening the action. I call with ace queen offsuit. He shows king 8 offsuit, and what do you know, he flops an 8, turns a king, and I'm going to end up losing yet again another pot to king 8 with 2 pair. So he had roughly about 45k in his stack. I chipped down to roughly 145k again, and really I'm just kind of frustrated at this point because hands aren't going the way I would really like them to, but like I said earlier, that's just poker. It's how the game goes. So we'll move on to the next hand at the new table, hoping to change things up. I really don't get much going at the new table. It's pretty much just a shove fest. I end up picking up pocket fours, going all in. I don't get called. The blinds are pretty high now, and I really don't have a very large stack at all. I have about 10 big blinds, so I'm happy to just steal blinds by shoving all in when I can. I end up winning a few more small pots in the same kind of all in manner before looking down at ace 10 of spades. In the cutoff, I decide to go all in, hoping that this ace 10 of spades will be better than the last one, and everyone folds to me, so I pick up another profit of 40,000. With all the momentum that I've been picking up and the blind still at 10k, 15k, I look down at King Jack offsuit in the hijack position and decide to make a raise to try and steal some more blinds or potentially play a pot against the blinds in position. So I make it 50,000 to go, and this doesn't really work out too well as the player on the button decides to move all in. He's got about 200k to start the hand, so after putting his 50,000 in the middle to call my bet and leaving about 150k left behind, I just decided to make the call with about 2 to 1. I'm really thinking that it's likely he'll have a hand like a low pocket pair that I could be flipping against, and it's sort of the case when he shows over pocket tens. We go to a runout which comes 2-9-3 with two hearts, a 5 of diamonds on the turn, and a 6 of hearts on the river. So his pocket tens are going to hold against King Jack here, and I'm going to lose a pretty substantial amount of my stack that I just built. After punting off my stack with King Jack offsuit versus the tens, I look down at King 9 offsuit in middle position, and I have less than 10 big blinds, so I just decide to go all in here. It's probably going to be one of the best hands I can pick up before the blinds destroy my stack. So I go all in, and the player on the button decides to make the call here, and everybody else folds. We go to a run out against ace 10 offsuit, so we're not in great shape. We've got to make a pair here, and this happens actually on the flop that comes 9 high with a 3 and a 5. There's an 8 of clubs on the turn and a jack of diamonds on the river. So my pair of nines is going to hold against ace 10, and I'm going to get a much needed double up to keep me alive in this tournament. After the last all in with King 9 offsuit, my stack really just starts to dwindle due to the blinds. It's a very short table at this point. There's only about 5 of us, and I think there's about 7 people on the other table, so we're getting really close to the bubble. And I see the middle position player raise to 40,000. I make the call on the button with Queen 7 of spades, and the big blind also calls. I don't really love just calling here. I think going all in or folding was probably a better route. After I call, it gives the big blind a really good price to call. Even the small blind has a pretty decent price to call with how much is going to be in the pot at that point. And I don't really think that the middle position player wanted to play for his whole stack, so going all in might have got a fold and an easy takedown. But regardless of what my hindsight looks like, we go to a flop three ways, which comes out 9-7 jack with one spade. And I kind of like this board because I've got bottom pair, an overcard, a backdoor flush draw, and a backdoor straight draw. And once I see the big blind player check it over to me and the middle position player check it over to me, I kind of start to feel like I'm going to have the best hand. If the big blind player had any kind of a pair, I would expect him to put pressure on us. And if the player in middle position had any kind of a pair, I really would have just expected an all in from him. So I decided to move all in here for my remaining stack, and both players fold out pretty quickly. At the time, I was a little bit worried that one of these players could be trapping, but that wasn't the case, and I take down a pretty nice profit in this hand. After the last hand, a few players get knocked out at the other table, and we move to nine-handed at the final table. Pretty early on, I get into a big pot as I see the cutoff player move all in, and I'm on the button. I look down at pocket tens, and there's really not much I can do here. He has about 160,000 in his stack. I have close to 240,000, so I really need to win this pot or I'm going to get knocked out of the tournament. We go to a run out which comes king high with an 8 and a 4. The turn brings a 6, and the river is another 6. So pocket tens are going to hold against ace queen offsuit, and I'm going to take down a pretty nice profit to make me feel good about this final table spot that I'm in. A few hands later, I'm now in the hijack position and I look down at ace king suited after the action folds to me. The blinds are a little higher at 15k, 25k now, so I make a raise to 75,000. And the player in the small blind, who's very deep stacked, makes the call here. The player in the big blind is now getting a pretty good price himself, so he also makes the call. And we're going to end up going to a flop three ways in position with a very strong hand. The flop comes out 3, 6, 7 with two clubs and a heart, and both the small blind and the big blind check it over to me. I don't really put them on any kind of a pair or draw at this point, or else they probably would have bet. So I decide to try and rep aces and kings here. I make a bet of 235,000. I really don't expect to get a call from either player. I'm hoping to just take down the pot with this large bet, but that doesn't seem to be what's going to happen as the small blind player starts counting out some chips. He's looking at how many chips I have remaining, and he ends up putting the chips in to make the call for 235,000. I'm basically all in at this point, so I'm a little bit worried. The big blind folds, and before the turn even comes out, the small blind states that he's going to put me all in. The king of spades comes on the turn, so I make the call, and my opponent shows king nine of clubs. A eight of clubs comes on the river. He makes a flush, and I'm going to get knocked out of this tournament in
So what's
seventh
up again,
place.
everybody? It was a pretty brutal end to the tournament, getting knocked out with Ace King there. I think regardless of if I had bet on the flop or checked the flop with the king on the turn, I likely would have, seen a bet by the small blind or bet myself and raised or been raised. So I think the ending was pretty inevitable to get busted in that hand specifically, but really that's just how poker goes. You can't always control what's going to happen due to a hand, and sometimes your opponent's just going to get a little more lucky than you are. So altogether I placed seventh out of like almost 100 entries there. Pretty deep run. Got to make it to the final table for my first tournament in the series with Agents of Poker. Real happy about that. Real excited about the tournaments going forward. Just getting to play in them and hopefully get a chance to go to the WSOP. It would be really cool to vlog the whole thing and end up with a ticket going to the WSOP and even get some clips while I'm out at the WSOP for the vlog. So really just excited for the whole process. I think it's going to be a really cool experience and opportunity for me going forward. Going back to the beginning of the video a little bit, it's going to take a little bit more time for me to get these videos out, but I really am just doing my best to keep my life on track and also get these content videos out for you guys. So I hope you guys are able to be patient with me. I hope you guys are enjoying the videos, and I hope you stay tuned. I'll catch you on the next one.